All right, so ready for a deep dive into a love match that's surprisingly complex.
Oh, yeah.
Capricorn on Capricorn action. What do we know about Capricorns?
Right. We're taking our trusty astrological guide, really digging into what makes these two tick when it comes to romance.
Because, let's be honest, you hear Capricorn and you think practical, responsible, probably good with their finances?
Right.
Not exactly like the recipe for a whirlwind romance, right?
And yet,
Yeah.
that's precisely what makes this pairing so interesting. The source we're diving into actually suggests that Capricorn relationships are not inherently harmonious, which kind of goes against what a lot of people think about same-sign compatibility.
It's true, you'd think two people who both value stability and ambition would be a perfect match.
Right.
So where does the friction come in?
Well, those very same traits that make Capricorn successful in other areas of life can become stumbling blocks in love. For instance, their reserved nature can translate into difficulty expressing emotional needs.
Yeah, it's like they both want that deep connection, but they're speaking totally different love languages.
And the source makes a really interesting point about Capricorns suppressing their emotional needs, even from themselves, leading to this sort of standoff where neither person feels truly seen or understood, even when deep down they might actually yearn for similar things.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we've got this emotional disconnect brewing, but then there's the communication style, or lack thereof, that's typical of Capricorns.
Exactly. The source really hones in on communication as a major pain point for this pairing. And it's not just about the quantity of communication, but the way they go about it.
Because analytical doesn't even begin to cover it sometimes, am I right?
You're spot on. The source actually uses the phrase silent tournaments to describe how these two interact, constantly analyzing and evaluating each other without ever actually saying what's on their minds.
So instead of just saying, hey, I really need some reassurance from you, it becomes this whole internal game of chess.
Precisely. They're looking for hidden meanings, overthinking every text message, and basically creating unnecessary tension because they're not communicating directly.
It sounds exhausting. Like imagine bringing that silent tournament energy to every little disagreement. No thanks.
You're not alone there. But here's where it gets interesting. The source doesn't just leave us with a warning label,
Hmm.
it actually highlights some unexpected strengths of this pairing that stem from those very same Capricorn qualities.
Okay, so there's hope for these two after all.
Absolutely. For instance, that shared drive and ambition we talked about, it can become a real power couple situation.
Right. Michelle and Barack Obama are both Capricorns.
Exactly. And the source points out how this shared value of ambition isn't just about career goals. It translates into how they approach life, always striving for improvement, whether it's personal growth or even mastering a new recipe together.
So that practical, grounded energy can actually become a source of bonding and mutual respect.
Precisely. And speaking of shared values, the source highlights the intellectual connection that often blossoms between two Capricorns. Think. Deep conversations about philosophy, dissecting documentaries, or even just spending an evening lost in their own thoughts, side by side in a cozy library. They just get each other on that level.
That's so interesting. It's like their version of a romantic comedy montage isn't about grand gestures. It's about stimulating each other's minds.
Exactly. And this intellectual connection also ties into another strength the source mentions, working together towards a common goal.
Okay, so maybe that jointly owned spreadsheet IS, a recipe for romance after all.
Right, it could be. But in all seriousness, the source makes a good point about how Capricorns thrive when they're striving towards something, especially alongside someone who shares their work ethic. So whether it's building a business empire together, tackling a complex home renovation project, or even just planning an elaborate vacation itinerary, that shared sense of purpose can really solidify their bond.
So it sounds like for this pairing, those initial sparks might not be fireworks, but rather a slow burn that builds over time as they realize how well they complement each other.
That's a great way to put it. It's about appreciating the subtle nuances of their connection, which brings us to some advice from the source on how to make this pairing work long term.
All right, so we've covered the potential pitfalls and the surprising strengths, but what does the source recommend for those brave Capricorns navigating love in this dynamic duo?
Well, it all circles back to those core Capricorn tendencies. The first hurdle, the source emphasizes, is acknowledging the challenges we've discussed.
So no more sweeping those emotions under the rug.
Exactly. The source stresses open communication about their emotional needs, even if it feels unnatural at first.
And maybe investing in a good therapist who specializes in silent treatment recovery. Just kidding. Kind of. But seriously, for two people who default to logic and analysis, Actually voicing those feelings is huge.
Absolutely. And it ties into the next piece of advice, which is to prioritize expressing affection. And I don't just mean grand gestures. Think small, consistent acts of love. A handwritten note tucked into the briefcase, a spontaneous hug after a long day, a simple, I appreciate you.
Because even though they might not say it out loud, those little things speak volumes to a Capricorn.
Precisely. It's about creating a space where both partners feel safe enough to be vulnerable and show their appreciation. Finally, and perhaps the most surprising piece of advice, don't forget to have fun.
Wait, Capricorns, having fun, is that even allowed?
It should be mandatory. The source suggests finding activities that encourage playfulness and spontaneity, just to counteract that innate Capricorn seriousness. Imagine these two taking an improv class together or trying a completely out-of-character activity like karaoke.
So trading that shared spreadsheet for a shared microphone every now and then.
Exactly. Injecting a little lightheartedness can go a long way in keeping the spark alive, and that's a great takeaway for any relationship, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Self-awareness and a willingness to embrace the quirks, both our own and our partners, are essential. This deep dive into Capricorn compatibility has been fascinating. But remember, the stars might provide a roadmap, but ultimately we're the ones steering the ship.
Well said. So to our listeners, especially the Capricorns out there, have you experienced these dynamics in your own relationships? Share your thoughts with us on social media because we're always up for more astrological exploration. Until next time.